we had a drought, if in fact it came to, what's the probability that you will have loss of life?
None, low, moderate,
Yeah, it's low
pretty
too,
low.
like a 1.
I like it.
I'm not saying low,
Okay.
because if you, I keep saying in the middle, because we have a lot of seniors here,
Mhm.
and they don't hydrate even on a good day.
So let's think about it for a second. If we break it down and we say, okay, we know it's been declared, there's a drought. Would City Island rally again for the special needs community? Would we do something special for them to thwart it? Would that be a natural knee-jerk response?
I don't think it would be natural, but it would have to be highlighted before.
Sure, but do you think it would be thought about?
Yes.
Yes.
So I know we have a community fridge, right? So somebody thought about that, right?
No, we thought about them during COVID too.
Sure,
Yeah.
absolutely. Because it comes to the forefront of your mind that potentially I'm gonna have a group of people who live on this island that need this extra support, right? That's a thing, right? And that's not just because we're talking about it right now. We've lived through that, right? So we've had some instances that happened and we knew that we had to help those that couldn't help themselves, right? So knowing that, does that then decrease the number? Does it go from a 2 to a 1 because that becomes the natural inclination? Are we comfortable with that? Do we think we're so naturally inclined to do that it drops the score?
I think we could do more. It's only.
Always can do more, always, absolutely. But do we think because we're thinking about it, it drops it?
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that speaks a lot to the fourth thing we're gonna talk about, which is your preparedness. So I think if we're comfortable with it being a low possibility of people dying from the drought, given that you all are an active community that's concerned about others, let's talk about your physical losses and damages, property impact from a drought. Do we think there'd be zero property impact, low, moderate, or high property impact from a drought?
What would suffer?
Your yard,
The trees, right? The garden club would be really upset because there'd be no flowers in the pots, right?
Increase fires?
Could be, right? The spark.
That
We
would be
also
my
have the
concern,
park.
fires for
Sure.
the drought, because like, there's warnings going on, you can have a campfire.
Mhm.
I mean, all those things have gone on already, we have Watch Beach, Health
Yep,
Department.
we're surrounded by the
Right,
park.
park.
So that's-
exactly
So that's more like a fire type of thing, oh, concern.
Fire and wildlife will be impacted.
Yeah.
Mhm.
The park.
so are we feeling like it's a moderate impact to our property,
Yeah.
the property?
Well,
Moderate or high?
Or high?
We didn't say, I would say we're out of the low category at this point,
Yeah.
right? Because we've named a lot of things that will suffer.
So that'd be
So,
high.
It's 2.
like two.
Might be high.
who say 2? Show of hands.
Yeah.
Me, I think five.
And who says 3?
I do it after what she said.
Okay.
So I won't say
It's okay. But it looks like the consensus is 2.
Okay.
Great, and then the next categories are business impacts, so interruption of services, if there's a drought, are businesses not gonna be able to open, are we gonna have, loss of business revenue because of the drought? 0% is not gonna happen, low is number 1, moderate number 2, high number 3.
Just real quick, everyone, if you check your email, everyone should have just gotten the PowerPoint.
What do you think? Will businesses suffer?
Yes.
Well, if there's if they're gonna put like, water usage and stuff like that, like business, so that may affect some businesses.
Well, we're talking specifically to City Island, right? Because we don't wanna
All the
necessarily,
restaurants
we
and-
wanna talk about our own infrastructure, okay? Because we can't boil the ocean, right? We can't, sure there's a watershed, it doesn't mean City Island's the only one that's affected by it, right? But we wanna know what we're doing for ourselves. So would Dominic suffer? Would any one of the restaurants suffer if we run out of water? Think about it.
Yes.
What about the schools? I mean, how is that gonna affect,
Sure,
Highland Cove?
absolutely.
Sanitation.
So I think if there is truly a drought, right, we need to figure out how are they gonna cook, those restaurants, without any water? How are they gonna wash their hands?
Correct.
How are they going to launder the napkins? Right, so you gotta think of it almost really granular, right? So if there's a drought on the island, the likelihood it would be pretty detrimental to the business population.
So we feel
But
like
those
it's a
kinds
low
of things are at home also, not being able to wash, not being able to
Yep.
cook, not being able to, so those kinds of things affect the individuals who live here as
Yep.
well.
And imagine if we just talk about COVID for a second, right? What are the two things we almost immediately ran out of in COVID? And I'm not talking about masks and gloves. What are the two things we ran out of immediately? Toilet paper, and what else? Lysol,
Oh,
right?
oh, yeah.
Like you could sell, if you went on eBay, you could buy Lysol for $650, right? So think about not having the water, right? Not having it accessible. Somebody's gonna have the market on water, and water is gonna cost $1,000 a bottle, right? So it's gonna become almost anarchy. And rules get bent during that time, right? You can use your mask, one and done, and then you can use your mask for 3 days, and then you can use your mask for 5 days, right? So things change over time, so water would be detrimental. So I think where we stuck at?
We're at business impact as 0 known, which is not where we are. Low is number 1, moderate is number 2, or high 3. Low, moderate, or high impact.
Oh, we had 3 on this one.
Yes.
Is that a general consensus?
Yes.
Yeah.
But then I think we have to go back and readjust what we said, how we affect our lives.
Human impact, but so the human
So
impact
this
is
is
different
for
than possibility of injury and death. So in order, because of the way this is built, it's built on algorithms, and so in order to move the category up, it's gotta be death or serious injury. Inconveniences, for sure, economic impact on individuals, definitely, but they're looking for the person, if it's possibility of death or injury.
And so I would say, so when it scores out, it's gonna take all things into consideration, and it's gonna take the first 3 columns and the next 3 columns, and it's gonna map it out, and you'll be surprised based on your numbers actually where it falls. It likely will fall very high as a result of that.
So the last one to talk about is as a community, your preparedness for a drought. So are you not at all prepared? Are you highly prepared? Are you moderately prepared? Or are you low prepared?
Not prepared.
Not at all.
Not at all.
Zero.
We got Costco.
Even though we've been thinking about the seniors and what we would do to support vulnerable communities, I think you guys have a little bit of,
Yeah, I
just a
think
little
there's
preparedness.
a little bit of something. I think it's on the radar screen. So when you're thinking about it, that gives you some cushion, right? So just because you haven't exercised anything doesn't mean that it's not valuable. So I think you're in the 1 category on this and not necessarily the 0 on this.
So we're low
Well, if you go by
preparedness.
intent, 1.
Mhm.
But in practice,
Well, you don't know, right? So the exercise is to get you to start thinking, which means when we get to the end of this game, there will be a top 5 or a top 10. The thought behind that is to then take it further. So if you're identifying where your risks are, and now we know it, we've done the methodology, then we come back together and say, so here's our top, let's say top 3, right? Because sometimes trying to do top 10 is a little too much. We take the top 3 and we say, okay, these are the ones that now we get John Doyle and everybody he knows to start talking about, because now we need to work on these. So as we believe that they could happen, and when they happen, we want a plan. So that's the point, right? That's the point of us being here.
So that was the first of 4. So you can see how this can
See
turn
how long
into
it takes?
like a really long thing. So now that we kind of know how the ranking works between the 0 and the 3, the low, the none to the high, we're gonna see how we can do with the next few and maybe kind of keep moving a little bit more. Because we've got 35 of these, we really wanna get through them all. If we don't get through them all, of course you guys have the presentation and you can always give us your rankings and then we can pump them into the algorithm and send them to you later. But it's a fun activity to do while you're in the room together.
I mean, we could always, if you do it, each individual wants to do their own, if we don't get through them all, you send us, everybody sends us the email on each individual's perception of it, and then we can overlay and find the happy medium in between, and so we'll find the commonalities, and then, score it out.
Yes.
And everybody's able to open the presentation on their phones, I just wanna check.
Yes.
Yes, yes, because I know one person wasn't, so I just wanna make sure everybody's able to follow along here.
Yes,
When you do this within your community,
And I'm happy.
you do it like this in an open room where you get feedback?
No,
Because
you're open.
I could see how several minds were changed, based on listening to comments from who else is in the room.
When we do this at the hospital,
Yeah,
there's
it's a
no
team.
less than 60 people
Okay,
in the room, and it is like corralling cats.
that's okay.
But we have to, we have to keep to the, we keep people moving, because one, we've done this every year, but two, you need so how I'm talking everybody through it, we wanna give the examples and make sense of it. Because it's very easy to say, that's definitely gonna happen, and we're gonna be screwed if it, let's work through what we mean by that, so that we can get to a real number. Because everything can't rank number one, right? So we have to figure it out.
All right, so moving on to earthquakes. What's the probability of us having an earthquake?
So have we had one?
We had one.
Right, we had one.
I would have said 0 up to like 6 months ago, just so everyone knows. But now you probably have to put it in a 1,
I remember
right?
sitting in my office
Yeah.
and going, I think that was an earthquake, And so now we know it's possible, right? So what do we rank
Low,
it?
medium, or high probability of happening? One.
No.
I'm hearing lots of ones. So we're gonna
Yeah, it's a
do
1, right? Because even though it happened, it wasn't like, buildings didn't crack and fall, we all shook a little bit and everybody was a little rattled by it and the aftershocks were a little weird, but there was no major structural damage, right? So we had a little shaking and we don't know that we're actually in line to have something of a higher magnitude, right?
So our human impact of having an let's say we do have an earthquake, what do you feel like the human impact is? The possibility of death or injury, is it nothing? Is it low, is it medium, or high? Possibility of death or injury in an earthquake?
No.
Well, remember,
What is it on the
but base it on the magnitude, right? What's the likelihood that we're gonna have something extremely high on the Richter scale in New York? Because if we did, who would suffer the most? Like Manhattan would suffer the most, right? Because that's where all the skyscrapers are and it's very densely populated. But do we really think that's a reality? Are we that high on the Richter scale? Or are we moderate? Is the Earth's infrastructure is just reminding us that it's possible, right? So,
But we have stuff that goes under the water here, like those big pipes and stuff. So you have an earthquake or something, they can just bust, they can be whatever, all the gas pipes. So because we're on an island, obviously, so that would be a concern for me.
Yeah, that's a definite property impact concern.
yep.
For the human impact, I want us to think though about like if we have one like we had the last time, what was the likelihood of people having death or injury from the earthquake that we had previously?
Low.
So at a 1?
Yes.
All right. And then as you mentioned, there's a potential for property damage. So do we feel like it's a low, moderate, or high property damage?
Based on the one that we just had.
2.
The one that we had.
Yes.
0.
1.
One.
All right.
1.
And then moving on to business impact. So what's the interruption of service? 0, 1, 2, or 3?
Did anybody stop doing what they were doing?
No.
Zero.
Okay. And then how prepared are we? What's our preparedness level?
Base it on what happened.
You're not ready for it.
I think any earthquake we wouldn't necessarily be prepared for, right?
After the earthquake, did anybody do any research about what should I have done? What should I have known?
I was in the right place to back something.
So did anybody do okay, what's the plan? Do we get under a table?
Right, did they Google that after it occurred?
I Googled.
So there you go. So you did a little personal preparedness.
Yes.
So don't sell yourself short. Now, as a community, we don't have a plan yet. We do have individual preparedness in process. So I don't know if you want to give yourselves a 0 or a low, but
I would say it's low, because I think,
I'd be a 1, a 0.
I would say that it was a one and done and people forgot about it quite quickly, right?
all right, great. So
You
that's
know
the
why?
second
Can I
one.
just say that it wasn't an earthquake, it was a tremor, and the fault line is a long way away, so we're not even close to any danger at all. So I think people call it a quake, it wasn't a quake. It really wasn't,
Although you can't tell anybody in the hospital that, because they were freaking out. The higher up on the floors you were, the more you felt it,
Yeah.
and there was a total freak
Oh, we
out
felt
going on.
Definitely.
right, so our next naturally occurring event is an epidemic or a pandemic. What do we feel like is our probability? 0?
3.
Yeah, 2 or 3.
We think we're doing it again?
Yes.
I'm tapping out if we do it again.
Coming back from
We are definitely doing it again. We don't know when, but we are definitely doing it.
Alright, so we have a 3 for our like.
Everybody good with that? With a 3?
Yes, across the board.
And when it happens, what's the possibility of death or injury? 0, low, moderate, or high?
High.
Do you think it's very high?
I would say.
Or do you think we've learned a thing or two?
Some of us have, yeah.
Some of us have.
I'm going high.
High?
Yeah, because people don't listen to the medical professional.
Okay. I'm taking my hospital hat off.
But I would
Because
say
if I was,
moderate, because we've already gone through one and we have an idea, you know, what it means.
so here's what I can tell you about pandemic. So when we first started out with the pandemic, I will tell you, the hospital community had no idea what to do. And the reason we had no idea what to do is because we were planning for the wrong thing. And for years, we were planning for the Ebola crisis, right? And the Ebola crisis is sort of like a onesie, twosie kind of thing, right? It's scary as hell if you get somebody with Ebola because, you know, if you're infected, you're likely going to die, right? There's not too much you can do for that individual. And you certainly don't want to catch it being in the hospital. So we're prepping for that, right? Our special pathogens carts, our donning and doffing, our isolation rooms, our, gases so that people weren't infecting each other, how we would treat people through glass windows and using phones to talk to people before having to go in the room. So we were really robustly planning for that. The problem with just planning for that is when you get something like COVID-19, this is not onesies and twosies. This is hundreds upon hundreds. And that is the game changer, right? So we were planning for the wrong thing. We now have lived through 3 solid years of dealing with every single variant of this disease. And although we started out really bad, we ended up really strong. And what we know now, we will be able to turn a switch on to go forward, right? So we know that we have hidden beds for, to be able to ramp up very quickly, and we can be able to turn that on in our computer systems very quickly. We know that this is how much PPE we actually need, right? This is how many spaces we need to be able to surge to this. And we have all the extra plans that come with it. And so in that sense, I'm speaking on the hospital, if we get another pandemic, although I would probably quit at that point, we would be much more prepared to deal with it this go around than we ever would have been the first go around. Because if you're not, shame on us, right? So as a community, you have to think, do you think, because we lived through this as a community, that should something like this happen again, would there be a grander possibility that we as a community would respond better because we've already dealt with it?
I want to say something. We are being prepared because the PSS Susan Center, she's sent out all kinds of letters and gotten the community involved so they've gotten all of their shots. And if they missed it, am I right? Susan?
Right, we have the pharmacy come to get vaccinations, we have emergency preparedness visitations, that's once a year.
So
And
here
then
we-
even during COVID, we had, the City Island Strong helping the seniors, whatever they needed.
Yeah, but City Island Strong was like only 1 or 2 times they delivered food though. Like we need something.
But then we also had other agencies
Yeah.
bringing stuff to the
Yeah.
seniors and helping to feed them.
Totally, yeah.
So all that lends to preparedness, right? You've done it once, you learned a thing or two, you put some things in place, they worked, right? It was never gonna be perfect. We never strive for perfection in this instance, because you're not gonna get it. But you have the roadmap to turn something back on again, right? You wouldn't necessarily have to start from scratch again. You did that already. So you have a little bit of a playbook that says, here's what we know worked. Let's do some of this again, right? Much quicker than you did the first time.
What number was SARS, you think, the epidemic? Was that an epidemic?
Yeah,
SARS?
well, so yes, it was, as was, the swine flu and the avian flu, and they were all, I have books and books and books of all the stuff we did during those events. But it didn't do this, right? Those numbers stayed very, very small and contained for whatever reason. We didn't get the COVID-like response to those.
And my concern with that is no one saw COVID coming.
Correct.
So the next pandemic or whatever, is it gonna be COVID-like? Or is it gonna be a different type of pandemic that we have no idea what
So,
we're
yeah,
dealing with?
so
So
there's,
how do I rate that?
so there's a whole team, so again, I'm gonna put my hospital hat back on again. So there's a whole team dedicated to special pathogens. And all these people do is study infectious diseases throughout the world. And we get to sit every month on this committee with these experts, I call them the cootie girls, right? The experts will then tell us what they anticipate is coming based on all the information they're getting from around the country. So we have these inclinations, we have these bits and pieces of information of what may or may not rear its ugly head. So, and in doing that, we think about, well, is that an N95 mask? Is that just a regular mask? Does that require a yellow gown? Does it require a blue gown? Like, so we do all that exercising. On the flip side to what you're saying, does the community do that, right? Is City Island doing that? Well, no, right? Because you're not really, you're hoping that it doesn't come back again. You're hoping that one, I got a few years for, right? So at the end of the day, what you gotta think about though, is your local hospital, your local facility is doing that. So we are shoring up so that the community can stay safer. So that's a link to what your question is, a link to
But my
yours.
concern to that is, look how long it took for a consensus with COVID
Oh, sure.
when it happened.
Sure.
And
Absolutely.
look what happened, what the people were left, like,
Absolutely.
what do we do? Do
Well,
we
we
wear a
had-
mask? Now wear a mask.
we had-
What do we do?
We hadn't had a pandemic at that level, of that magnitude in 100 years.
Right.
So, but now, having had that memory built in, you have an idea what social distancing is. You have an idea about disinfecting. You have an idea about.
True. So we've learned
So,
some things.
You learn some things.
Absolutely.
And we've documented some things.
You can't be prepared for everything.
But right, but my thing is like, we don't know what the next pandemic is gonna be. Is it gonna be respiratory isolation? Is it gonna be some other sort of isolation? Is it gonna be, I don't know.
But what I will tell you is, so there are these individuals who are experts in the field who do this all the time. What I would tell you is, you would take what you've learned during what you've lived through and see how it applies. And in many cases, it applies, right? Because the similar things, if it's an infectious disease thing, is distance, hand washing, and masking, right? And vaccination, obviously. So we know those things already. So we already have the playbook for that. Now, we identify how is it different, if it's different. And it may not be, it may be the exact same thing. In my 34 years, every infectious disease that I have been dealing with has all been the same methodology. Hasn't been different. It's always respiratory in nature, it's always gonna be person-to-person contact, and it's always going to be, well, how do I distance myself and how do I protect myself? So those parameters don't necessarily change.
Okay, I'm gonna say 3.
For what? So for the.
Are we prepared?
Are we prepared at a high, moderate?
For the pandemic we're talking about?
Yes.
I would say, we have a model.
Yeah, I would say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you in. Go ahead,
It's all right.
I'm sorry. I would say probably a 2. Like, there are things we can do better, like the social safety net, unfortunately, like, when COVID started, there was a lot of like, if people needed meals, they could go to the school. Like, that stuff's gonna need to be restarted.
Sure.
And like, what we found out is that a lot of those meals, like, you needed to go get them, but what if you're like a homebound person in Pilot Cove, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, someone has to deliver those meals to you, and thankfully a lot of the Boy Scouts and their parents went and really took care of that. But like, those are synergies we need to be better about. And then a lot of people lost their job, and thankfully we did not lose our jobs, I'm grateful for that. But some people, if they worked in the hospitality industry, for example, all of a sudden your source of income's not coming in. Like, food insecurity really hit record highs. And like, how we deal with those things. That's why I wouldn't say 3. I would do respect, of course. I would
So
say 2.
here's how you get to a 3.
Okay.
You get to a 3 by documenting your issues
Mhm.
and documenting your solutions. That's how you get to a 3.
Okay.
And you put that in your playbook. And so when you have to pull the playbook out, Turn to the page, and here's what we did,
But
and here's
of
what we need
course,
to do.
like we said before, everything can be made better.
Of course.
So if it can be made better, does it go to a 3? I don't think it. You know, does it go up a rank, or do you
So-
work on the model that you had, which a lot of it works?
I think we're at a 3, and it could be a 4 if, you know, more consciousness and more planning were implemented. But I think pretty much the way you described all of the pandemics, we know that now. And so you don't have to browbeat somebody, you don't have to convince somebody that we're taking the liberties, you know, all this nonsense. We've done it, so that's why I said prepare it at 3, but it could be better. If
Well, I
you-
think, is 3 the highest on the ranking?
Yeah.
It's,
Yes.
well, yeah.
So
Very,
3
very
means
good.
you got it figured out.
No.
If you don't think you got it figured out, and I'm not saying that you don't, but what I'm saying is, all the efforts have not been documented somewhere. Had they been documented somewhere, and John could pull it out and say, this is everything we did, I would say, well, then you're a 3. Because we have that, right? We have it documented that this is everything we did. And we know what works, and we know what doesn't in this scenario.
You have how to turn it back on the minute it needs to be turned on.
Well,
So
there
I
was-
would say you're more than 2
There
counts.
are different organizations working on different
Especially
things.
with homebound.
And I would say a lot of those people.
Yeah.
Okay, but I'm saying you're a 2 because you don't have
Alright, too.
a source of the truth,
Right,
and that's what you need.
okay.
Good, so we'll go preparedness at moderate, and then for your property impact from pandemic is probably low to none, right?
Yeah.
And then your business interruption, do you feel like that's low, moderate, or high?
High.
High, great. Okay, so we're gonna go on to extreme temperatures. What's the likelihood of extreme temperatures happening, either very hot or very cold on City Island? What's the likelihood?
3.
3? Great. Okay, then your possibility of death or injury from that extreme temperature.
3.
Okay? What about physical losses and damages of property based on temperatures high and low?
Well, 3, could go high.
Pipes can burst.
Correct.
But do you think that's gonna burn City Island down if we're really, really hot?
As a
I mean,
community.
we've had some pretty hot summers, right? Do we think we're gonna burn down? And there's no drought right now, so you still have water to put it out, right? And you do have a fire department on the end, right? So basically that's not quite that terrible, right?
Yeah. All right, so then we're saying for property impact, maybe moderate.
Yeah, let's do a moderate.
Okay. Business interruption of services, low, medium, or high, or none. We're used to winters, right? We go out anyway. But do you feel like interruption to your businesses being low, moderate, or high?
It could be moderate, not
I mean,
high.
what do we have, restaurants?
Right, are the restaurant's gonna stop serving if it's too hot or too cold?
Stop doing cold.
Well, yes,
Right.
people will not be able to get to the island if there's a snowstorm and,
Potentially, yeah.
you know, and that's what they rely on,
But
people coming.
the community, so don't talk about people that are coming, the
Well, when you
community.
say with the business being impacted,
So yes, but the islanders themselves wouldn't be restricted necessarily unless you were.
if you can get out of your house
Right, that's different.
because of the
Yes.
snow,
Sure.
and you have to shovel the snow and you can't, you can.
But how long would it last for?
A few days.
I think the businesses could manage that.
Maybe
I
moderate
think so
to
too.
low to moderate?
I think we'll say moderate.
Moderate. Okay, and then how
Yes.
prepared are we for extreme temperatures? Do we have shovels? Do we have salt? Do we have the things we need? Are we prepared for
How about
cold
for like
or
heat?
for the heat? Do we have air
Cooling
conditioning?
centers,
Well,
we have
that
cooling
is-
centers.
We have cooling centers, the library,
We have the Legion, the school centers, the library.
So it sounds like you're moderately prepared for
Yep, sounds pretty good actually.
Wonderful. Okay, the next one, flooding. Is the probability of flooding none, low, medium, moderate, or high?
High.
Very
High,
high.
okay. What's the possibility of death and injury based on flooding? Low, moderate, or high?
We had it during Sandy.
Moderate.
Moderate,
People died.
okay. How about for physical losses and damages of your properties?
High.
Or high? Interruption of business services. High. And how prepared are we as a community? low preparedness, moderate preparedness, or high preparedness?
We're not prepared.
Oh,
It's a big flood.
We've had some extensive rains, heavier rain sometimes so quickly, and people have gotten flooded, and trying to just locate pumps and things for different people, it's just impossible.
John is building it all.
Right, and then started
We
to,
also had an
started to what's their
evacuation when the police came around and told us to evacuate the island for one of the storms.
It
was Sandy and the mayor did too. I have a quick question that does fit into that somehow, I'm not quite sure. But convincing people that they had to evacuate when we were told by the mayor and everyone else to evacuate. And what's the percentage of people that evacuated here?
I didn't know.
We're Bronx people, we're not used to being told what to do. Shame on
Where
you.
I'm from, you would have been out of town.
Well, we figured if we were near the water and we were higher on the island, and we're near the
Doesn't matter
island,
anywhere on
we
the
didn't.
West Coast.
And we weren't, for an island community, we weren't the worst hit, right? So if you look at a community like Far Rockaway, Far Rockaway was decimated, right? So maybe our infrastructure is not so bad, right? Yes, we get some flooding maybe on that side of the island because we're, sort of tilting in this way. I would just say that if we're talking about specific to flooding, the first thing that comes to mind is Hurricane Sandy, right? So, but think of it out of the context of Hurricane Sandy, because Hurricane Sandy wasn't just flooding. Hurricane Sandy was a hurricane. Do you understand? So whereas just really heavy rains, what's gonna happen in really heavy rains? Some of the blocks are gonna get flooded, right? Some people's basements are gonna take in water. Some people are gonna need help, right? It's that kind of thing. So I know it's easy to go, but Hurricane Sandy, that's a whole different monster, right? So just think of it in that way. So what one we were up to?
So we were just finishing flood at being, as your preparedness, we were deciding if it was a moderate or high.
I would say high.
Prepared?
Oh,
Prepare
prepared?
for it?
No.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, no.
That's
Not prepared. I thought it meant the threat. No, I would not say we're prepared for it.
So are we
The
at
city
a
is-
1 or are we at a 2?
I think we're at 1.5.
1.5? So we're in quandary here. So who's got 2?
2 for Tuesday.
What do I got? 1, 2,
One, I can't.
4. Who's got 1? 1, 2, 3.
Abstaining.
Come on, I got people not raising your hands.
One or two, Nancy.
1 or 2?
Yes.
2?
I was one.
2? Up, 2 is a winning it. 2 is a winning it.
Two.
Okay.
So now we're up to hurricane and coastal storm.
There we go.
Likelihood.
Now we're in it.
Likelihood.
Oh, boy.
Probability of it happening, 0, 2, 3.
3.
Okay, next, human impact, possibility of death or injury.
Yeah.
Is there any?
High.
Is there a little, a medium amount, or a lot?
2.
Yeah,
Medium
I'd say
amount
that's
of
right.
injury?
2?
Okay. Property damage, 1, 2, or 3?
3.
High probability of property damage, okay. Interruption of business services,
3.
3?
Yeah.
And
Just
then
property
how
damage.
prepared are we? Low preparedness, moderate preparedness, or highly prepared?
I don't want to snitch on anyone here, but when Sandy happened, nobody exactly left the community, present company, and
I
quit it.
snitched.
So, I just say, so,
Yeah.
for what it's worth, I think,
No,
and I don't know if the
left-
city's
police
prepared.
knocked at the door.
uh,
I left before my husband, but my husband's a Bronx,
Yeah.
or grew up in the Bronx. But then, when they knocked at the door,
mhm.
he went, he actually went to his mom in the Bronx, and I went to Westchester.
So what that sounds like to me is that people feel prepared, right? You feel
If you
prepared,
feel confident to
need
stay, then you feel somewhat prepared. Or you're just obstinate.
Or you don't have anywhere to go,
They were
which maybe in some
prepared.
cases that was too.
Okay.
Peer pressure.
So do we feel like it's a,
There was no one on this island that was prepared, in my estimation.
But not everybody left.
Not everyone.
No, but
I don't
not
think
even
people took it
close.
seriously.
Yeah.
I was threatened to leave, so I had to leave.
Okay. So my husband left and went up to Westchester, and I worked. So I didn't come back until the water had receded, so I stayed at the hospital for the
What
next
you don't think of when they tell you to evacuate during a major hurricane is the the power line's going down and your house is
Yeah.
on fire.
So
Yes.
That's where I would jump.
that's the thing that we can't prepare for.
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
We need the city to address that, frankly.
Yes, we're trying to.
So if we haven't, right, if we have done nothing different since Hurricane Sandy, then we are not prepared, right? The community is not,
No.
We are not prepared.
so there
Three.
it
We're
is.
not
I
prepared.
mean, what?
I
Low
mean, how many
preparedness.
people actually have the address or someplace that they could go that's out of that zone? That's in a safe.
But that's also something to think about,
That's
right?
what I'm saying.
So
people
that,
are
so
not
as a
thinking.
community, having lived through something like that, that's again the playbook, right? Here's what I lived through, here's what happened, here's what I need to do for myself going forward, right? That's the point of having, preparedness, is that I lived it, and now I know that I need to script this out for the future. And I think what happens is, once it's over, people just move on past it. And so you're not prepared unless you script something out. So make the plan for yourself.
I think what we just saw happen with the last hurricanes that didn't impact the people on the coast as much as it impacted people who are inland, who had no idea that this is something that they need to prepare for. So I think as a community, we need to take all of this into consideration, knowing that storms are getting worse, they're getting stronger, getting bigger. We need
And we're
to,
an island.
And we're an island, exactly.
And we're losing our beach line, our coastline.
Yeah.
So I'm hearing you say you have a low preparedness for hurricanes and coastal storms. Okay,
I'd say it's lower than a low preparedness because when I saw, no, and I'm adamant about this, I saw, people said to me, see, it didn't even hit us. We were supposed to be right in the eye of the storm. It went to Red Hook. I'm going 15 miles away, you guys.
So
That's,
And at one point, the storm readings, so full story. I was in. A lot of the bars were having like parties because people all thought they were the day off from work. This is before I started at Jacobi, just FYI. But they literally drew the arrow to City Island, and everybody went silent, and everybody got their check and got out of there. So that was like a real thing. People thought Sandy was going to hit City Island, and I remember a lot of people saying, if the tides had been different, we could have been decimated.
that's right.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So I think here's where a ton of the false sense of security came from.
Yeah.
The year prior was Hurricane Irene. And Hurricane Irene, I know, John, you're taping this, was really just pissing in the wind, right? It was nothing. It came in, it's the storm of the century, it's gonna knock us out, and it was nothing. And I remember standing outside the hospital going, this is a balmy breeze, this is lovely. And so I think that gave us this calm that we shouldn't have had. So the following year when Sandy rolled around, we were all like, we did this already, and it was nothing. And the problem was this was going to be a little something, right? And so we should never sit on our laurels. We should always say, okay, we got lucky in that one. How do we prepare for the next one?
So, low.
Yes.
So,
We're doing
okay.
low on it.
So the next one is severe thunderstorms. What is the probability? Is it a zero probability, low, moderate, or high for a severe thunderstorm?
It's high,
High,
right?
okay. What's the possibility of death or injury for a severe thunderstorm? Low, moderate, or high?
So it's a thunderstorm.
Low.
How many
But
people
a
died?
tree could fall, the branch can hit you.
Yeah,
I'm
all of
sorry,
that
I'm
can
not
happen.
I don't mean to be like so doomsday.
But
I
yeah,
had people that I know got hit by it.
all of that can happen, absolutely. But you have to look at the big picture of it, right? So if the tree doesn't fall, is anybody gonna die? You know what I mean? That kind of thing. Like, so the likelihood that during a heavy rainstorm that we're gonna have death, not so much, right?
Pretty low. Low?
Yes, it's low.
Low one. Okay, so physical losses and property damages.
So that's fine.
3, okay, and then interruption of businesses.
Do you think so for a thunderstorm?
Severe
Well, if, like, again, because again, we're subject to, if the, with the trees falling, power lines being cut out, flooding, things of that nature,
This
that's,
doesn't
I'd
happen
say
often from a
moderate.
thunderstorm here.
Do we think it's a 2 or a 3?
I think it's a two.
I say two.
Okay.
And how about our preparedness? What are we feeling? Are we,
When it rains really hard, are we prepared?
Pretty well prepared.
I certainly hope we are prepared for a thunderstorm. I really do.
Severe, Janice, it's severe.
I get it.
It's 7:01.
Come on.
Yeah.
What happened, brothers?
I'll put us at a high preparedness.
I have buckets, so when I put it in my house,
So the next one is tornadoes. What's the probability? Is there a low, moderate, or high probability
low, but.
Please say low,
Lowish,
please.
Low.
I
Yeah.
think it's the
Low.
possibility of death and injury with a tornado. Low, moderate, or high?
Well,
Here, you're talking here though.
Yeah.
here.
Yeah, if we were like in the middle of Illinois, like, we might have a different
Yeah.
rating system.
Right.
Okay, how about property impact here? Low, moderate, or high for
No.
a tornado? If one came through City Island.
If one came
Oh.
through,
I mean,
If it came through,
yeah,
it would be.
it would be pretty bad.
Yes.
If one
Yeah.
came through.
If one came through.
High if it came.
yeah,
Okay, how about business impact? Low, moderate, or high?
it'd be high.
And how prepared are we for tornadoes?
We are
Oh,
not
not
prepared.
prepared.
Zero preparedness.
Yeah, never
Great.
want to see one.
All right, this is the last one of our natural hazards, guys. Congrats to us. This is winter storms and blizzards. How likely are they to happen?
Oh, hi.
Pretty likely. What's the possibility of death or injury when we have a blizzard or a winter storm in City Island? Low, moderate, or high?
You think it's one or two?
Two.
Two.
I say two.
We have Jacobi. Jacobi won.
Yeah, you got us.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Are we going with one or two?
What could happen that's a two?
Although, we've had blizzards,
Right,
not many people died, so I
right.
say one.
So let's keep it a one. Let's keep it a
I mean, just make sure you go to the store and get your bread, milk, and water. All right.
How many people do you get at Jacobi during a storm?
Just a
like
few.
coming
No, it's
to
very
injury?
quiet during the
And
storm.
it's mostly people that
Very
are-
quiet during the
No
storm.
car
They only bring you
accidents,
guys-
That's different, right? You get, so you do get some fender benders, or you get somebody who slips and falls on the ice because they're walking home. But the
Struggling.
census drops,
Mhm.
because people stay home, people stay in their houses.
If it rains in New York, people stay home.
That's true.
Mhm.
All right, so property impact, is it low, moderate, or high for a winter storm or blizzard?
Property impact.
No, that's it.
I would say low.
Low.
Yeah.
How about interruption of services for your businesses? Low, moderate,
Two.
or high?
Two. I would say two, because a lot of the seafood. I was here in 2005. I was working at the seafood restaurants during the summer months. I remember there was the bus strike. Does everyone remember that? And that really disrupted business. So if the buses are going to be offline, that really does disrupt the businesses.
Trucks.
And again, people stay home during that kind of
True.
weather, they don't come out.
Okay.
We're also on different grids.
You're on what?
We're on different grids, so different people have power outages.
Yeah.
So they're not-
Mhm.
Okay,
Also
our
true.
preparedness for blizzards and winter storms, are we low, moderate, or highly prepared?
I think we're pretty.
I think we're probably
Low, moderate, or high? Moderate? Moderately prepared or high?
I think we're
I think
high.
we're high.
Yeah, I would agree with
That's
that.
a snowstorm. We can deal with that.
They've been very good about like salting the roads and stuff like that. I have to say.
Excellent. So we got through one of the four, and that took us quite a while. So this one, we now already have your rankings for your top few of your natural disaster vulnerabilities.
Carrie, why don't we move to one of the other categories and just pick the real important ones, like skip the ones that are kind of silly.
Okay, so we'll go to technology. Let's start with communication failure.
One question. Well, I don't remember you touching on emergency services in all of those disaster situations, like fire, ambulance, all of those. Those are what a lot of people are concerned about on this island in a snowstorm, because we're a bridge away from all those
Yeah.
services.
So we had something, in one of the other categories for called VIP situation, and we have that for the hospital. And I say, take that off the list, and we named it something else. And the reason we named it something else was because of our situation with the bridge and access to the island. So we were thinking about it.
We call it summer surge.
Okay.
The summer surge is when all the outside people come into your community because they're gonna have long traffic lines.
And you can put anything necessarily in that category, right? It could be the summer surge, it could be, the inability for, help to come, it could be any one of those things that you wanna call it in that category.
How about emergency evacuation? We are so concerned about that as well.
Because
Sure. Absolutely.
But we don't leave.
especially
But-
when it's working.
But emergency evacuation can be in a category all by itself.
Yeah.
Because that could be any one of the reasons that we just discussed could be a cause for that, right?
I agree.
Okay, so we're gonna go to communication failures. What's the likelihood of communication failure, meaning your phones being down, your internet being down, all of your ability to communicate with anybody out off the island? If what's the probability of that happening?
Good.
Higher than than on the mainland.
Yeah.
Because like 2 of the 3 big carriers barely get service on the island to begin with.
Right.
So if you have T-Mobile, Sprint, any one of those lesser entities, you don't get service.
But when, can you recall a time we've lost total communication power on the island? I mean, besides the
Recently,
storm?
yeah, there was a big outage with AT&T and Verizon
Oh,
in the last year.
And building on what Nancy's saying, when there's a bad windstorm, which happens here, you lose optimum, you lose your cable even.
Yeah.
So like it is
I lose
actually,
cable more than I lose my phone.
yeah, but that's something like I think we need to be better about.
You're monitoring. So is there a possibility of injury and death because you lose communications?
Yeah.
You need to call an ambulance.
You can't call your emergency services,
Yeah.
so there's a chance.
What?
Do you think it's a low chance, a moderate chance, or a high chance? Moderate. If we lose communications, we can't call for backup.
Well, moderate if you need to access services.
Okay, how about any property impacts if you don't have your telephones and your internet or your cable? Your property gonna have to suffer any consequences?
No.
Probably not.
No, you're just gonna be.
How about businesses? Businesses impacted if they don't have their credit card numbers, if they don't have their phones to take orders. So moderate, high, what do we think, moderate or high?
It's at least moderate, and
Moderate.
there's signs out that say cash only.
Yeah, cash only.
Okay, and how prepared are we for communications failure? Do we have backup communication plans? Do we have radios? Do we have, does the City Island FD have radio plans for communicating one side of the island to the other? Does that exist that you know of? And if it does, if you don't know about it, then it might as well not exist, right?
Yeah.
So we're not terribly prepared.
No.
Are we not at all, or just about?
I would say so.
What about going through for mass transportation failure? So what's the probability of there being a mass transportation failure or interruption? So we could say the strike could fall under this, a failure of us having access to mass transport. How probable is that? Not at all? Low, moderate, or
Well,
high?
the only chance that we have is the bus. That's it. If anything happens,
If you didn't have bus
It's off.
service, that's it. It's
if it affects the bus, then that's all
all,
we have.
all
then it's
people
high.
who use the bus service to get to the train service to get to work. It doesn't exist because the buses go on strike.
Well, we attended, emergency preparedness at the senior center. And the 2 military people that presented handed out the materials, and I was looking it up. They recommend you not drive, that you take public transportation.
Yes, always.
So that means you've gotta wait for that bus
Yes.
to take you to the train, or you have to walk. So,
It would cause a disruption.
big time.
Absolutely.
All right, so then what's our human impact as far as possibility of injury or death from there not being a bus?
I don't know if that's a.
Maybe people who don't have cars and can't get themselves through. Or 1 or 0.
You can jump into somebody else's car.
Right, I mean, I think, again, the infrastructure would be, we take care of our special needs population, right, if that happens.
Okay, there's property impact, not likely to be any property impact from a mass transit shutdown. Interruption of services for your businesses. Low, moderate, or high, if we don't have
Well,
that
if
bus.
buses don't come onto the
I
island,
think it would be high.
Well,
They couldn't get any business.
well, people do, they still have the ability to drive, so we do know that people come on the island in cars, right?
That's for sure.
And funny vehicles, right, those weird
Well,
ones
what
that.
about the workers, like, that work at the restaurants? They may not be able to get access to
They
the
don't live on
island
the
because they
island,
usually
close,
may
right?
take public transport, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
So we'll do moderate then.
Yeah, I would do moderate.
And then your preparedness for mass transportation failure.
No, we haven't,
Direct
I don't think
backup
we
transport.
planned anything out for that, right? You do, at the city center, okay.
So low.
But so that's a very specific entity that's done some planning on it.
And we have a van and like, we could have staff prepare vehicles if we needed to get people at the center.
It's funny you just said that because, you know, I hear your voice almost every day on my answering machine. Cause my
Right,
father,
cause we had that one call.
my father was hooked up to the whole thing, I've never stopped it because I like it.
So we're gonna do a third one in the technological disruption, just so we can have a top 3 for the category. So, your natural gas failure, what's the likelihood of natural gas failure on the island? 0, not likely.
Have we had it happen?
1, 2, 3.
Not even in Sandy.
Okay, then let's do
Low.
That's a good.
Easy. What about, water failure? What's the likelihood of there being a water
Have
outage?
we lost water?
Water
ever?
disruption.
Have you turned the faucet and it didn't come on?
They shut us
Oh no,
off.
this,
We had pipes replaced on the avenue about
Yes.
10 years ago, and then we had groundwater where you couldn't use it,
sure.
so.
But there are water monitoring stations.
Now it's
Mhm.
good.
Yep. But what's the probability that there's a failure?
Low.
No.
Okay. And then what's the possibility of death or injury if we have a water failure? I hear low. All right. How about property impact, physical losses and damages if we have a water failure?
Well,
Low. Interruption of business if we have a water failure.
Moderate. At least moderate, right?
At least
moderate.
And then what's our preparedness for water failure?
Good.
Low.
yeah.
Don't even think about it.
Low. Okay. So we have 3 from technological. Should we move on to human hazards? What's the likelihood? These are the scary ones. What's the likelihood of an active shooter on the island? An active shooter is
High.
Yeah,
We've had that already.
We had it not too long ago, unfortunately.
So we're talking about like a shooter who's coming in with the intent to hurt a lot of people, not necessarily a shooting. Like we definitely have one-off shootings and crime, but an intentional attack with gun.
I think it's low.
I don't think it's low, no way. Sorry.
Well, so if there hasn't been an active shooter event by definition on the island, if we're using the
For a
definition.
large group of people?
Right, with
Someone who tries
a
to.
person or people with
Shooting
the
to be-
single intent of doing mass death or harm
Like a school shooting
On the island.
or
on the
a
island.
grocery store or someone who comes in with
Also
intent.
worship.
Comes into the church and just start shooting up people, right? So we haven't had that particular incident, right?
To me, it's just a matter of time before that is gonna happen.
Yes, there is,
So I would want to be prepared for it.
yes, but we wanna score it based on what we know,
Probability.
right? So right now, we know we
It's
haven't
unknown.
had that. So, but I wouldn't say low
Yeah.
because
I would
this
just
is where we live, right? So I would, yes, John?
No, I'll let you finish it.
I would say, let's keep it kind of realistic and say a 2 on this one. So we go straight to a 3 without having had it occur, we're projecting.
Okay.
So I would say right now, 2 is where sort of the sweet spot is on this. And that's unfortunate in and of itself, that we have to score it a 2.
I would just also point out that, you know, in this neighborhood, it would seem to me there's probably a higher proportion of people owning firearms than most other Bronx neighborhoods. Either because they're NYPD or they went through the licensing,
Sure.
you know, that is very restrictive in New York City, thank God. But, you know, as a result of that, you know, there are probably more people here who have those firearms than most.
But that doesn't necessarily put us in a risk category.
This is what is at a 3. I think 2 was the right, I agree with you that 2 is the right way. I'm just saying, because you're saying it hasn't happened yet, you're right, but the risk factors, to build on what Joanne was saying, I think do exist.
So I would be less inclined to worry about the folks who have legally obtained a firearm
Okay.
as opposed to the ones who don't.
Okay.
And so those are the ones we should be worried about, right? Those are the ones we don't know
Yeah,
on the island who have
fair.
a non-legally obtained firearm.
Yeah.
That's the one that
I don't
maybe
even
be
think of
problem.
that, I think of mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
Mental illness is a huge
Yes.
conversation about shooting events. That
There's a
we
lot
could
of
go,
crazy people
we
on
can-
city island.
we can go on for days
Yeah,
about
we
that.
could.
So, but let's keep it simple for right now. So we're in a 2.
We're at a 2.
We're
Okay,
at a
so
2.
human impact being possibility of injury or death when there's an active shooter is high. Yes. The property impact, what's your physical losses and damages if there's an active shooter? You feel like it's low?
Do you think people just won't come to the island now because there was a shooting?
For business? business?
No.
Business impact? You
Probably
think the business impact will be anything?
No, I don't think
No,
so.
I don't think
Maybe
so.
for a couple days, but.
No, yeah.
So low, and then what's our preparedness? Do you feel like you've had any trainings in your
None.
centers? Have you had
None.
any community
Come see Jacobi.
learning how to do stuff, lead
Training.
training?
Absolutely.
I will say, I think the school does do those trainings now in a way that
I
maybe
hope
we
so.
don't all. Yeah.
Because
Yeah,
the schools
that's
have not done,
Yeah.
have
John,
not
have you
always
taken the
done.
training?
John has not taken the training.
Oh, see you in December.
No singing. You got me. You got me.
The school struggles with what kind of training that,
Yeah.
I don't know what City Island School is doing, but schools in general have struggled with how to train their students. What I will tell you, we go from Columbine in '91, where there was zero training and, you know, mass death, and then you go into now, and the schools are doing some training, and you have less death as a result of it. There was just a shooting up in Somers this morning, and a teenager was killed this
Where
morning.
was
So,
it?
in
In
Somers.
Somers, where my daughter lives, is that, I mean, as soon as I heard that, I thought it was a domestic.
Well, that's what, so, I don't wanna speculate, cause I don't know all the facts yet, but there seems to be some kind of domestic situation attached to that. But you have a high school student that is killed as a result of that, right? So,
I
so
think
it's,
a wonderful area is the synagogue
yes.
because of the anti-Semitic.
Mhm. And I know, you notice there's, you know, more often than not, somebody from the 4-5 precinct sitting out front there.
Awesome. So I put us at a low preparedness.
Mhm.
The next one in this category for human hazards being summer surge, where we're talking about an influx of people coming to the island. Could be for good, could be for bad, just people coming. So what's the probability that there will be a summer surge?
Three.
3++.
Yeah. What's the possibility of death or injury if you have an influx of people on the island?
Moderate.
I agree it's moderate, because, you know, if you look back of things that actually happened, right? How many people, when they come onto the island, get into car accidents, or, you know, there's fisticuffs or whatever, because there's just too many people on top of each other. Or
Lack thereof,
yes,
yeah.
absolutely.
Do we track that in any way? Because I've noticed, just because I live on the avenue, traffic isn't anything like it usually is.
Exactly, it's not as bad as it used to be.
So,
Even on Mother's Day.
Yeah.
This year was not bad at all.
so
No,
I think it
that's-
depended on, so here's what I find. I find, and I, you know, listen, I'm here almost 15 years now, so I have figured out when to come on the island,
Right.
when to come off the island. right?
Uh-huh.
So, but I noticed that, you know, in the evening coming around the circle, you still have a problem. If I am foolish enough on a Saturday afternoon to try and get back home, shame on me, right? So I know not to do that, but others don't know that, right? And then what happens is people halfway through wanna do that broken U and turn around, cause they're like, forget it, I don't wanna spend another, you know, any more time in this line trying to get on the island. And I think that still is a problem. And because you have so many people driving recklessly, because they're trying to get around all that traffic, and so many people coming down the fire lane as a result of that, I think there's a huge impact for injury and death.
How about for
Also, I've been driving and there's people smoking marijuana, which is fine, it's legal, I don't care.
Well, let's
Well,
think
like,
about
you're
that
not
statement for a
supposed-
second. So, here's how I view that.
But it's not, you shouldn't be smoking or like drinking and.
Right, so that's how I view it. Drinking is legal, smoking pot is now legal. Have at it, whatever you wanna do. But you can't do either operating a motor vehicle,
That's right.
right? So if you are, which is, I mean, listen, I leave for work in the morning, it's 8 o'clock in the morning, and the car behind me and the car in front of me, I'm like, I'm stoned by the time I get to work, right? So it's just, it's outrageous that that's where we're at right now. But that will cause an accident,
Right,
right?
that's what my
Absolutely.
So for property impact, physical losses and damages based on the summer surge, low, moderate, or high? Property moderate? And how about interruption of services with businesses?
I don't think that's, I think the businesses are welcoming it.
Okay. And how about preparedness? How
Wait a
prepared
minute,
are we?
wait. Interruption of services, yeah, services to us.
No.
Like the ambulance, the fire
He told us
department.
That's not a good point.
They'll still get through.
changes, but. Okay.
I put it out low.
Yeah.
She's still, you guys. Okay, for preparedness, how prepared are you for the summer surge? Low, moderate, or high?
It's a work in progress.
He sounds moderate.
Yeah, I think we're at least moderate. You know what to expect.
Do we wanna do one more of these, human or?
Do you got a good one?
We have mass casualty incident.
What's that?
Mass casualty incident.
I mean, it could happen here.
That was, that was the boat that went on fire by the gas station.
Yes.
So, yes, so it's possible,
Yeah.
right?
So I think it's a low, moderate, or high?
And that was Orchard Beach, right, the family that got hit by the lightning.
Moderate probability of mass casualty, and then the possibility of death or injury based on, mass casualty incident.
That's fine, yeah, it's at least moderate.
Okay, physical losses and damages for property.
Well, that boat sunk right to the bottom of the water, you know, both of those boats sunk.
Pretty good, two.
Yeah.
And then interruption of businesses based on a mass casualty incident. Low, moderate, or high. And then how prepared are we for that? How prepared are we for that?
So the hospital's prepared for that, I don't know that the
People heard
community
it once.
necessarily has to be prepared for it,
Yeah.
right?
The only, I'm sorry, go ahead, Miss. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I would just say, like, from a community perspective, the one issue we continuously run into is that our geographic remoteness, which is kind of a charming characteristic in many sense, people like to live in an area with natural beauty and all this, is our kind of Achilles heel in all these situations because we're remote and, you know, look, the precinct and things like that, there is a low officer complement, there's a low police force out here, response times are higher. So that's kind of the yin and the yang of it. So how to answer your question, how would we respond as a community? We'd be dependent on outside help. That's it. And God forbid something happens at the bridge, which, as everyone here remembers, the summer of 2008, where there was the ATV went on fire on the bridge, and people were playing beer pong in the fire lane. And there was a raid on the Sunoco and all that stuff. We are vulnerable in those situations. Not that beer pong is like a state category 1 emergency, but
They rated this in
Yeah.
I thought preparedness, I put it at 2, moderate.
Cool.
That's good. Okay, so we're gonna do one more category, we'll do 2 from that one, and then we're gonna call it a night. So we have, this is our, hazardous materials, category. So how likely is it that there would be biological terrorism event on City Island? Is it a target? Are there any soft targets for terrorism on the island that you can pick?
No.
Low or okay. What would be the human impact? Meaning possibility of death or injury if there were a biological terrorism. High. How about physical losses and damages to your property? Low, moderate, or high?
Could be moderate.
Yeah, moderate.
Depending on the substances. Interruption of business services. Would people want to come to City Islands? Biological waste everywhere? No, they don't.
that's gonna impact it.
Be high. And how prepared are we for that?
Oh, 0.
Yeah,
Not prepared. Okay. How about an explosive event? What's the likelihood of there being an explosion on the island? Well, do you have any sites
Gas
that are,
lines, I don't know.
that are exposed? Anything that you see as being kind of wide open? This could be an easy target.
There's a Con Ed sub tower station. You can have explosions from gas from any one of the restaurants.
So we feel like it's a low, moderate, or high risk of.
I think you're at least at a moderate, right?
Moderate.
And what's the possibility of death or injury if there were
That
any
could be
explosion?
Moderate. It's at least moderate.
Yeah.
How about the police range too?
What about property impact if there were an explosion? Low, moderate, or
That
high?
would be high, right?
In interruption of business services if there were an explosion on some part of the island?
Yes.
And how prepared are we?
0.
Okay, and lastly, chemical event. A chemical attack or spill or exposure on the island. Do you have any chemical plants here? Do you have any chemical storage places?
Does that include nuclear plants or anything?
Good, if you have it.
There's nothing on City Island.
No, there's nothing here, but aren't we,
Spillage on the sound from the sewer system.
You mean Indian Point?
that's what I mean. When I first moved here, that was the big thing.
So we feel like that's radiological, right? We can do radiology instead.
Yeah.
So we feel like it's a low, moderate, or high probability.
But if we're relating it specifically
Right.
to Indian Point, that's a specific category, right?
Yeah.
But so they do the analysis based on rings and distance, right?
Okay.
And what kind of leak or eruption, right? So
Sure.
they score them differently.
Okay.
So we're decently far away for a small exposure. If it's a
Right.
large exposure, then we know that's
No one's immune.
You know, they do bring bombs to Rodman's.
Yes, they do.
And I always wondered.
Sure. I'm not sure they're radiological or anything like that, but because they have
Right.
rules and regs that they have to follow.
We have big tankers on the water that carry everything from fuel to you name it, so that could spill and reach our shores.
Sure.
So we feel like it's a low or moderate,
We feel it's a possibility, right?
Yeah,
It hasn't
that's
happened
modern.
though, right? We haven't had this happen yet, right?
Okay, and if it did, what would be the possibility of death or injury? Low, moderate,
Wildlife, it would be brutal.
How about to y'all?
Well, it depends on the agent, right?
Yeah.
It could be in the water system, it could be in the air, it could, it could be detrimental to our food supply, right? So it depends on the agent.
Yeah. It's difficult to judge in that kind of like hypothetical scenario because it's never happened, and I kind of agree. Like,
Don't
All right.
say it never happened, because many years ago, they had the leakage from the dump, right?
all right, yeah, you know what? I stand corrected. Fair enough. Good point.
There were circles of children dying of leukemia,
Mm-hmm.
all over the city island, all over the country
Yeah.
club.
So there's a moderate possibility
And
of
it was
death.
very,
Yeah.
it was real,
Yes,
because I lost somebody.
I remember that, absolutely.
What
You're
about
right.
with your property, if there are physical losses and damages, if you have a chemical?
Yeah, there's lots of property.
Moderate, low,
We're gonna say at least moderate,
At
because
least
we don't know
moderate.
the agent, right?
and interruption of services, business-wise,
I would imagine if we have some kind of spill on the island, that businesses will be affected.
moderate. And then how prepared are we for a chemical event?
Yeah.
We don't really talk about it, right?
Alright,
Because we're worried about that hurricane.
Next one down.
alright. Drum roll, please.
Well, let's see what we scored out.
Are you ready for it? So, the top 5, based on the ones that we've ranked, include a 61%, coming in at 61% is your hurricane and coastal storms. Number 1 threat, number 1 hazard for the city island community, based on this exercise. The next one, floods. That's
Yeah.
number 2. Number 3, we have extreme temperatures, hot and cold. Number 4, we have an epidemic or a pandemic. And number 5 was the last one we just talked about with explosive events. Do we feel like that lands? Does it feel like
No
that?
pun intended, of course.
Does it make sense based on the exercise?
Yeah.
So those are the top 5 things that we then, as a community, go back and say, hey, John,
Yeah.
these are the things that we are fearful of,
Mhm.
and we need a better way to make ourselves more prepared for these categories.
Absolutely.
And then we map that out and get the agencies involved that we need to help shore us up.
Absolutely.
So I think what we're gonna do with this, there are other categories if your group wants to do more scoring. We're gonna send this document as it is with all of its scores in place to John, and then he can either distribute it or you guys can figure out if you wanna do more scoring on more categories. But it's a really good start for you to be thinking about, like we do every year, we make our emergency management plan for the following year. So we base our trainings, we base our policy review, we base our guidebooks on what we scored. So as a group, you may think about, how do we do some hurricane and coastal storm preparedness? How do we do outreach to the community? How do we get all of our plans in place for when it, if and when it happens, which it probably will, what are we gonna do first thing so that we can get up off the ground and hit the ground running? So putting together your plans for the year based on your HBA is a really way to, you know, we can't, like Janice said, we can't boil the ocean. And like one of our colleagues said, we can't be prepared for everything. Like anything can happen. But knowing that these are ranked based on your community input, this is a good place to focus your energy. Things will happen. We did not have earthquake on our top 10 this year. We had now. So you have to flex. You've got to, you know, we were kind of like, darn it. We missed it. We didn't get it on our bingo card. So things will happen this year that aren't on your top 5. It doesn't mean you didn't do a good job ranking it. It just means that it's nature. Like nature has its own plans for us. But it's a really good place to get started.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Julie, if you want to come to any of the trainings that we hold, Carrie could send to John the information, and you can feel free to sign up. It costs you nothing just to show up.
Great.
Thank you for having me.